I believe that in a truly theosophical life, there is no gap between the life, the teachings, and the work. It all gets blended together. It is said of the Buddha that he taught in 10 different ways. We are far from being Buddhas, even the most distinguished theosophists are. But once one has this inspiration of theosophy in one's life, the division between what we do, what we think and say, and what we are becomes less and less important till it fades away. So in speaking about the perspectives of Sri Ram's life, I will inevitably be also, or the perspectives of his teachings, I will naturally be touching upon his life and his person. Let me just go back historically to a certain very important aspect of the theosophical approach to life and the Theosophical Society's work. HPB said, Theosophy is not a religion. It's a religion itself. In her most illuminating article, published as a little booklet, Is Theosophy a Religion? She, in her very forceful language, speaks about the crust, the thick crust of belief and superstition in the religions, every religion. And Theosophy, on the other hand, is true religion divested of those beliefs and the superstitions. The Mahatmas themselves said that they didn't want to provide crutches for people to hold on to. It's so easy to do that. All the religions are doing it, and the politicians are doing that, whether they are communists or capitalists or whatever. But the whole of the evolutionary process is a development of true intelligence. Intelligence is part of that immortal spirit in us. It's all intelligence. To use the ancient Sanskrit term, it is chit. Chit is all-embracing, bright intelligence, and that is growing or revealing itself through evolution. And that is what the masters wanted, HPB wanted. Colonel Olcott spoke about free and fearless investigation of truths. And this is, without expanding on it too much, very central to our theosophical work. Not to encourage belief in authority and become dependent on that authority. Even if we hear truths from the master's letters or from the Secret Doctrine or any other book, they are not real truths because they are words, they are concepts, they are ideas. They become truth only when through our own investigation, contemplation, and purity of living, we absorb them, assimilate them, and until they become part of our own life. Now, what happened was that as time flowed on after the founding of the TS and all the extraordinary energy and enthusiasm there was, and the great work of Alcott, the Theosophical Society spread all over the world, west and east. And slowly, in about 50 years or so, gradually beliefs developed. The dependence on authority became strong. People claimed authority. Not that they were bad people. I knew some of them. They were very fine people. But this is a kind of subtle change which takes place. I believe it was when Sri Ram became president that a kind of silent revolution took place in the TS. He did not create controversy. He did not provoke reactions by things he said. He did not decry anything or run down any person. In our language, in South India, Tamil, there is a saying about putting a needle into a banana. Doing something as if it is putting a needle into a banana. The needle goes in without any resistance, if it's a ripe banana, not a raw one. And he knew that art, that without the membership knowing what was happening, he brought about a great change in the society, back, or rather forward to a spirit of inquiry, of self-knowledge, self-dependence, of quietly trying to understand things for oneself and not merely repeating what other people had said, which Krishnamurti often called second-hand knowledge. But it is not truth, of course. And if we read his writings, we find everywhere there is this thrust. He knew the Secret Doctrine very well. Joy mentioned this, that he didn't quote much from the books. It was not because he didn't know the books. Here I come back to the person. When he was still in college doing graduate studies, he was a very poor student because he had two great passions. One was Theosophy. So he was reading Theosophy when he should have been studying his textbooks. And the other was Napoleon's campaigns. I can't understand why. But he knew all about them. And a less warlike person, you could not have fun. But he started studying Theosophy at a very young age. But he did not see much point in repeating and repeating what other people said, however great they are. And we go back to the greatest of Earth's teachers, the Lord Buddha, and this is what he said: do not believe what I say, and stay with that belief. You consider what I say, and do not accept what I say, or what the environment says, or what the people around you say, what scriptures say. Find out for yourself. Be a lamp unto yourself. A few years ago, we published an Adyar pamphlet, new series with the same title, Be a Lamp Unto Yourself. And it consists of a talk given by a very learned scholar, learned in Buddhism and in Hindu philosophy. And he has pointed out how in Hindu scripture, not only in the Buddhist, but in Hindu scripture, in Jain scriptures from many sources, we get this same message: be a light unto yourself. The Bible also says it. You are the light of the world, and let it shine before people. But very few people, very few Christians, I think, see the importance of that statement. But it was this approach to life of learning, opening one's mind and heart to know deeply inside in such a way that it changes your life, that Theosophy needs to be studied, and I think he emphasized. Perhaps this was the most important aspect of his presidency. Let me pass on to some other things. He lived Theosophy. I don't say he was a perfect man, but he lived Theosophy all the time. For example, living Theosophy means that the values we uphold, the truths we understand, are not to be put in practice conditionally. For him, living a life of brotherhood, of friendship to others, of being kind, generous, etc., was absolutely unconditional. It was unconditional, unwavering, one-sided practice of what he felt the theosophical life was. And I can say this very honestly. You will find an article in the June 1973 issue of the Theosophist by one Mr. B. Shivarao, a very distinguished journalist and member of the upper house of parliament in India, who was a very close friend and colleague of my father's, as they both worked in the famous newspaper New India, which Annie Besant started and ran for several years to gain political freedom for India. And he mentions this, that neither at home or very privately, secretly, nor outside could one hear Sri Ram speaking something derogatory of others, even really critically of others. If he pointed out something, it was always with so sympathetic feeling that you didn't feel that it was really a criticism. And I think very few of us really take Theosophy in this way. We always say, there are so many tensions, disputes, maybe even somewhat aggressive quarrels sometimes within the Theosophical Society in one place or another. And anger comes up and so on. I'm sure you can all imagine what it is like. And always the excuse is, the other people did this. they behaved in such and such a way. In his life, that has no validity at all. What other people did or not didn't matter. He was invariably as brotherly as he could be. He never, it seemed to be in the background of his consciousness all the time. And I think that is something very, very, very valuable that we have to find for ourselves. That the whole teaching of karma, for example, means self-responsibility. It doesn't mean you wait for the other man to do the right thing before you will yourself respond in the right way. You do what seems right, irrespective of everything. And to be brotherly, to be kind, to be gentle, to be generous is all part of that theosophical way of living, which must become our way of life. And he, for example, he never earned money because as soon as he left college, he started working for the TS. He used to get a very small honorarium from Annie Besant, not so much from the TS. Joy was talking about this, that in those days, people, not only here in the American section, but in many places, just gave up all worldly considerations and worked for the TS and left it to the lords of karma to do whatever was necessary. And I think they have never let down anybody. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah. I'm not saying that one should be imprudent, but you may remember Felix Layton here, he was a very young man. I was in school when he arrived in Adyar. But just the clothes he was wearing, he had been lent some Indian clothes and had lost his luggage on the way. Dr. Arundel gave a speech here in Olcott, inviting young people to come to Adyar and to work for the TS. He took that very seriously, and with just a few dollars in his pocket, he set off for Adyar. And he arrived without those dollars and without even the few clothes he had. But nothing really bad happened to him. And he was one of the very active workers of the American section. Norma Shastri, Norma Mackey, as she was known before from Detroit, she did the same thing. So my father did that. And there was the organization called the Brothers of Service, who all decided to dedicate their lives to the Theosophical Society. So my father never earned money, never had anything put away for his future, but he was the most generous of people. Whatever when people came to him, he just gave without thinking too much about whether he should give it or whether he would need it later on in his life. If he could afford it at the time, he would give it. So that is the kind of unconditional practice of Theosophy. I would say allowing our soul nature to express itself freely without the selfish mind interfering. That kind of Theosophy is what he lived or tried to live. As I said, I'm not trying to eulogize him, but in thought, word, and deed. It was not that he was careful about speaking. He was a very silent person, but he never thought like that about other people. Norma used to say, Sri Ram suffers fools gladly. But the fact was, he never thought of anybody as a fool. So he wasn't suffering fools. He was highly respectful of everybody, whether that person appeared as a fool to others or not, whether he was a very humble servant or whether he was an important person. And because he had this respect for others, he received a lot of respect to the end of his life. And that also is a principle we must, or a perspective, whatever you like to call it, which must be very clear to us. The more we give, the more we receive. Not just money. But if we give love, affection, we receive that. If we radiate happiness, then happiness comes to us. If we are generous with our worldly goods, then something happens which makes our life secure. So I think to keep this in mind is very important. Joy's title appealed to me very much. The strength of gentle wisdom, strength and gentleness together. And to be firm in regard to essentials, but to be flexible, considerate, yielding on matters which are not essential is an art. And in his life, we could find that. And thereby, he warded off or avoided a lot of controversies. I remember the period when everybody said that there was no third volume of the Secret Doctrine. This was all an invention of Annie Besant. Till fairly recently, Caldwell's investigation has proved that this is not so. Annie Besant just put together the leftover material after HPB's death together, and she called it the third volume of the Secret Doctrine, but they were all her writings. But at that time, people thought this was spurious, and it should not be called the Secret Doctrine. But others said this was HPB, and it has been the third volume, and we can't allow this to happen. So the tensions were there. And my father said very quietly, and he followed that policy, he said, if Annie Besant were alive, she wouldn't have bothered whether you called it the third volume of the Secret Doctrine or whether you called it the book Esoteric Writings. What does it matter what it is called? The substance matters. So people wanted to call it Esoteric Writings, and it was called so. And there were many things like that. There has been a lot of controversy about what C.W. Leadbeater said about Mars and Mercury. In fact, Leadbeater baiting is a kind of hobby for some people. But my father knew him at very close quarters. So did some other distinguished theosophists. Ernest Wood, for example, who never liked Leadbeater, but was very fair to him. We recently reprinted something in the Theosophist about what he had to say. And there was no doubt at all that Leadbeater had clairvoyant powers. One of the remarkable things he has written in Man, Whence, How and Whither, this was in the early part of the 19th century, 20th century, that he said, the time will come when people don't have to have newspapers delivered at their door. It will come through, they will come through a machine. The email was absolutely unknown at that time. Nobody even imagined such a thing. I have heard from authentic sources that once he was in the company of C. Jinarajadasa, Arundel, and my father, he said it is from this group that the future presidents of the society are going to arise. Nobody thought that would happen to my father because he was nobody. He used to work a great deal in an anonymous sort of way. He had been a recording secretary, treasurer, he had been nothing, he had been secretary to Annie Besant, and he was not known in the world till 1940s. But CWL, it seems, specially put his arms around him as if to point out that he was not excluding him. Well, I'm not trying to create belief, but maybe there are facts. So my father would not run down CWL or anybody, which doesn't mean he believed that everything CWL wrote was truth. He didn't. He made, CWL made mistakes. He may have mixed up some fancies with his perceptions, but he was undoubtedly, in the view of various people, a clairvoyant. But there was this controversy about Mars and Mercury, a kind of raging controversy. I remember a meeting during a British summer school when Hugh Murdoch, Dr. Hugh Murdoch, astrophysicist, said this was all rubbish. And there were others there who felt very hurt, and there were hard feelings about it all. In such cases, my father was never a partisan. He said, we know nothing about it. How can we know whether this or that is true about Mars and Mercury? Let us keep our judgment in suspense. When we know, we know. Or when we know something seems reasonable, we can accept it. A reasonable hypothesis is not a bad thing to go by. We don't know that karma works. We see through various effects by the fact that somebody is born with musical talent or mathematical genius, that there must have been some background. So say the law of karma seems to be a sensible thing. It explains this. But I can't say I know it. So we may accept a hypothesis if it's reasonable. There are certain things we know or we think we know that's also rather doubtful. But where we cannot possibly know, he would say, keep your judgment in suspense. What is the hurry to come to a conclusion? There's a very nice article by the Dalai Lama where he writes and says, you live as a Buddhist. What is the hurry to go to nirvana? Don't talk about how to get to nirvana. I'm putting it over simply, but that's the gist of what he says. And that was also Sri Ram's attitude. If you don't know, keep quiet, continue to learn, to hear other people, listen and study and reflect over things, and by you will come to know about it. So, in all these matters, I think he gave a perspective to would-be theosophists. That is, all of us. Perhaps we are already theosophists, perhaps we are just members of the Theosophical Society, but we are moving along. And these are things which help us to move in the right way, that kind of spirit. And part of this living of Theosophy for him was never to project himself. Somebody quite outside the Theosophical Society, on meeting him, said, he casts no shadow. And that was true, because he never tried to make himself important or believe he was important. He was most considerate of others. And he used to say things like, it doesn't matter whether you are president of a lodge or of a section or of the Theosophical Society. It's just as important to be the gatekeeper, to do all the little jobs in the right spirit. And he did all the little jobs for many years of his life. Anything that was needed in any part of the society. He had been a teacher, he had been a journalist, he had been an official, he had been just a counselor for the innumerable people who came to him with their personal problems, a wise guide to many. But he quietly went on doing his work without ambition, without wanting to reach some place, and so on. And that kind of self-effacement or subjugation of the egoistic nature in ourselves is, I think, essential. Otherwise, the TS would be like any other organization. I remember a question and answer meeting when people asked, why is it that we don't have a large number of members? So-and-so attracts thousands of people to his lectures. And he said, of what importance would it be if we attracted 1 million selfish people to the TS? It's much more important to attract people who have this altruistic spirit in them. And a handful of truly altruistic people can do far more for the society than a lot of efficient, selfish, self-promoting individuals. And his life gave a picture that this could happen. As Jesus said, we are all people of little faith. We don't believe it is possible to live a truly theosophical life. And I think from time to time in the world, avatars come, teachers come, and in our society, distinguished leaders have come to tell us by the example of their lives that it is possible to live a truly theosophical life. Don't be afraid of living as a theosophist. And this includes not conforming to the world. Because the world, as we know, is beautiful, nature is beautiful, but human society is full of wickedness because there is not the right view of things. Theosophy gives us a view of life which is absolutely precious because it contains everything to inspire us to live unselfishly, not to conform to the world. And none of our leaders have conformed. Sri Ram would not do what everybody did if he felt it was not the right thing at all. And he suffered for it. He had a very hard life, although people may not realize it. because my grandfather was an engineer and a very generous man. Any number of people just came and ate in the house, poor students and whatnot. And he died suddenly, leaving the family with nothing. And my father was the head of the family. They lived in very, very frugally for some years. He was used to that, to live simply with very few things. But he did not do what was the conventional thing to do. He did not believe in being conventional. Neither did HPB or Olcott or Annie Besant or any one of our leaders. We belonged to a Brahmin family. And in those days, early 20th century, my father was born in 1889, the caste system was still very prevalent. And it was considered a great sin, so to speak, to have close physical association with somebody from the so-called untouchable part of society. We had such a woman in our house. She used to do all the work. And when my parents went to Theosophical meetings, it was she who looked after my brother and myself. She was a very nice woman. But this was considered an appalling thing to do. And so a large part of the family ostracized my father, but he didn't bother. He felt that was the right thing to do, and he did it. And that was his attitude about anything that he felt was not right. He wouldn't go along with everybody or do what was conventional and so on. And we may perhaps also try to look and see how far our minds merely copy, adopt opinions, and get conditioned and influenced by our surroundings, the nation in which we are born, the race to which we belong, our education, the type of family in which we have lived, the sort of books we see, the television programs which we view. How far do our minds get conditioned? Are we capable of remaining true to ourselves, not conformists? This is not a question of flouting society, because there are people who, Joy mentioned yesterday that my father, what did you say? He grew a beard, is it? Long hair. Well, Brahmins were not supposed to do various things, but he didn't follow all those rules. He did what he felt was right. So at one time, I believe when there were a lot of hippies around and people complained, he said to somebody, I was myself a sort of a hippie because he did the things which were not supposed to be done. Although he was meticulously clean and tidy, and that wasn't part of hippie life. But he wouldn't conform. But as I said earlier, he would never create a little storm around him. He would do all these things in an almost unnoticeable way. Then there is another point with which I will finish. I shouldn't go on and on. Allow you perhaps to bring up any questions you want to. He had the kind of great strength that comes out of a true conviction of theosophical principles. For instance, if we believe is not the right word, if we see to some extent with our hearts that there is a plan, that the laws of the universe are inviolable, all pervasive, if we are all growing towards a state of perfect beauty, intelligence, goodness, and so on, if we are deeply convinced, then there are many things which follows from that. So there were situations in the tears which produced anxiety, which were very disturbing. I can't say that my father did not feel concerned. He even perhaps felt a certain stress because of that. I think just at this moment of that time in the early 70s, when the government of the state in which Chennai is, Tamil Nadu, decided to acquire almost half of the Adayar estate. It was a very anxious time for all of us, and we had to work. Norma used to say to me, "You are a slave driver," because we didn't stop working, meeting officials, writing petitions, and so on. My father by that time was very frail. He had undergone the surgery here, and he couldn't assimilate food very well. And he did his best, and he guided us. But although he felt anxious, his attitude was, we will do our very best, and what happens will happen. And that was his attitude with regard to many things. We think, oh, this must not happen in the society, and I'll fight for it. But we can't be sure that what we are fighting for is the right thing. Perhaps from a higher point of view, certain things have to happen. A certain turmoil takes place. Perhaps it shakes out the wrong kind of people, or the people who aren't really suitable for this kind of work. This has happened time and again. And we must take it in our stride, peacefully, harmoniously as far as possible, not bearing grudges. Be always ready to stretch out a hand of friendship if there are opportunities to do so. But he had this perspective in himself, which he conveyed to others, that you do your best. And this is what the Bhagavad Gita says. You are concerned only with the action. The fruit will take care of itself. You sow the right seeds, and it will grow into a good fruit-bearing tree. So, concern yourself with doing your best. Don't ask, how is this going to bring success? Will it succeed or not? Whether it is the lodge or anything else. If we do our best, things will take care of themselves.